Yeah, there was still some good moments there. Still just doesn't end in a satisfying way.
Yeah, well, a lot of anime don't really.
It is a pretty common complaint, I'll give you that.
So that makes it your turn. What do you want to watch?
Well, I think we should really take a look at Sword Art Online.
Sword Art Online? Anime Indecision.
Yeah, Sword Art Online, it's actually a really cool show. Like, come on. I know the premise is really generic and honestly not that brilliant. It's like, ooh, a bunch of people are trapped in an MMO. But actually when you watch the show, they really take it very seriously, and they deal with a lot of the implications of these people who are stuck in a situation, they can't get out, and if they die in the game, they do die for real.
I will admit, I have seen a few shows with that premise, and this is definitely one of the better ones, but that doesn't mean it's without its own issues. For one thing, there's a lot of really weird pacing issues, I find, with Sword Art Online. For example, the first few episodes, it's really skipping big chunks of time, and while that's not a problem in and of itself, because it's the first episodes and you don't know what the show is like yet, I honestly went back and checked to make sure I hadn't missed an episode. And to me, we were missing out of a lot of the reactions to that premise. I mean, if you're going to have people stuck in a video game and if they die for real, I want to see them reacting to that and realizing that that's the case and realizing what they're in for. And we glossed over a lot of that.
They do skip ahead a bunch early on. I think that's probably because they want to treat it very seriously, but I don't think they want it to start out quite as grim as it would be, because the fact is, some of the people, when they found themselves in that situation, frankly, some of the people just, like, committed suicide. I admit, it would have been interesting to see a lot of the people who were just, like, trying to play the game or figure what to do and trying not to die and sometimes failing.
Later on in the show, though, they try to use the power of people committing suicide, and they didn't give it the kind of showcase they could have given it. And some of their messages about living life as it is and living in the day and trying to be happy in your situation, a lot of those messages get kind of... If they could be more powerful if it started out more grim and you could really see them conquering that.
Yeah, it's true. They really could have emphasized it a lot more. I think maybe they were a little bit too worried that the low-level combat wasn't going to be as exciting or something. But I know that doesn't seem to be the core of the show. So they really could have done a lot more work with it. But still, that first story arc from Sword Art Online is just, like, fantastic, really. When you look at it, some of the characters don't necessarily have all that much development, but you still get a lot of... You learn about them, you empathize with them, and the show has a surprising emotional core for something that, when you just hear the premise, you think, oh, it's going to be another one of those.
Yeah, I think it helps that it's not focused on the combat so much. Like, you're not sitting around watching them farm experience. You're not sitting there watching them put skill points in or something. No. Like, when you see combat, it's usually boss battles, or it's usually because there's some situation happening with the players. So,
we start out with our protagonist, Kirito, and he's surprisingly interesting. I mean, when you start out in that first episode, you're thinking, this guy's maybe kind of a dick. He seems kind of selfish. He doesn't seem very well connected to other people. And I suppose in a way, he may seem like one of the people who's better prepared to deal with being trapped in this situation where...
He doesn't seem to take it too emotionally hard.
He really doesn't, and that makes him seem kind of odd, and that makes him maybe seem a little off at the beginning, but as you get to know him, and yeah, they do have those little time skips, but he clearly does grow a fair amount from there, and he becomes pretty interesting.
And we do get to know some of why he's so distant, too. And he's almost another example of how the premise of the show is very kind of cliche, but it pulls things off. Because Kirito's look is very cliche.
He looks like generic anime hero number 7.
He's literally dressed all in black, His outfit looks practically like a Japanese school uniform, but with a long coat. Mm-hmm. He even has just, like, short, black, shaggy hair and black eyes. Like, he doesn't stand out much as an individual. But the more you get to know him, you do get to really care about him. It's not my favorite show, but he's one of my favorite things about it.
But that really is, like, the strength of the show, is that the characters it focuses on, you do start to care about them. Like Asuna, who we meet in the early episode, and then she just kind of goes off on her own. But when we see her again later, we find out that, wow, she's actually, like, a strong person. And yeah, there's, like, that surface level where, okay, she's a badass at fighting in the game. But you really start to get to know that, first off, she has, like, an actual personality, and she cares about things, and she does seem to be a strong person in other ways, too. And that's probably why she was able to continue going in this very hard situation these people found themselves in.
I do like the way that in the show they tend to show Kirito and Asuna very much as equals. Like, maybe Kirito is a bit better of a swordsman, but on the battlefield they will go together as a partnership.
Yeah,
they work so well.
Yeah, it's always feels sort of implied that he's better at the fighting, but honestly, when you watch it, you don't see that so much. Even though it's sort of that feeling is there, you're like, no, she's just as awesome as he is at that stuff. And he maybe has one or two little tricks that he found out because he's the protagonist or whatever. But but really, they do feel like they're partners, and as they develop a relationship over time, it feels surprisingly, like, grounded and natural for something that happens over, a relatively small number of episodes.
Okay. Well, I'll agree that I love Asuna, and I love Kirito, and I love how they develop together. No one else really stands out.
There are a lot of other characters that there is an episode about them, and you get to learn about that person in that episode, and they have an interesting story. But yeah, you're not seeing a whole lot of development of them. Some people, you see them again later, and you're like, oh, that's cool, that guy's back, or he's still survived, or that's good. But yeah, it really doesn't spend as much time developing those other characters. Then again, they're trying to cover a lot of ground in that first half of the season.
My problem is, a lot of times the characters seem like they have more of a distinct personality in that one episode where they're introduced, mm-hmm. And when you see them again and again over time, it almost feels like it loses that. Like, it feels like it's not showing you everything you saw the first time.
No, that's true. I think there may be some of that. All these secondary characters seem to have less personality as it goes on.
By the end, there's this group of girls, and they're all friends with Asuna and Kirito. They're pretty much main characters. Like, they're not as main as Asuna and Kirito, but
they're central to that season's story.
Especially Lifa.
Yeah.
That group of girls really drives me nuts, because they went so far out of their way to make Asuna interesting, and to make you care about Asuna and show how strong Asuna is, and then to take all these group of girls who are her friends, and they could have such an interesting dynamic, because these girls are all supposed to be very capable in their own right.
Very.
And then they just become background scenery. Like, they just keep them around because they feel like they should keep them around. It literally gets to the point where you could switch their scripts and it wouldn't feel weird.
Yeah, I have to admit the series does go a little bit downhill as you get farther into it.
Yeah, and they also do some stuff later on to Asuna, where all of a sudden they switch her. They take her from this woman who has agency, and they put her into these damsel in distress moments.
Yeah, which is very grating, because again, you watch that first story arc and she's so integral. She's like, they're two pillars, Kirito and Asuna, and they're the ones you care about, and they're both worth it. And then there does come a point when she just doesn't kind of get the spotlight anymore, and suddenly she's kind of robbed of all that, like, stuff that made you like her, and you're really like, why can't we have more of what was going on before?
Well, and I had so much faith in her from before that I fully expected her to get out of all of her scrapes on her own. It's so built up, you don't expect her to need Kirito or anyone else to help her.
Yeah, absolutely. They're both really badass, and it's at the point where if something bad comes up and when they're walking down the street, they just kind of like look at each other, it's like, you want to handle this one? Because that's how they are. But they definitely seem to lose that later on. And when they started the second season, I really thought that they were going to focus more on Asuna.
Yeah, there's definitely some imagery there that suggests that Asuna's going to play a bigger role, and then she doesn't.
Now, she gets her story later on, and it's not the same quality story.
That last story arc with Asuna is probably the worst story arc in the entire... Not even probably, that is the worst story arc in the entire series.
But here's the thing about this show, though. You care about these characters so much from that time you got to know them that by that end, you're still watching it. You know, you're still emotionally involved, even though it turns out when you look back, her story is only half about her.
So if they came out with a season 3...
I would have to go and watch it to see if they correct more of these mistakes, but it's true, I would start to wonder, because they seem to be getting farther away.
This is what I'm thinking. If season 3 was having the same kinds of issues of season 2, at some point, my goodwill towards the characters would not be enough to carry me through. So I appreciate that. I love these characters too. I have this emotional attachment to them. I really care about them, but my goodwill can only carry me so far.
Yeah.
And then what they did to Asuna, where she starts out kind of very strong and well-developed and then peters out a little, they also did it with one of the new characters who was introduced in Season 2.
Yeah, that seems to be a problem. Again, for all the things that they do right, I guess they have a little bit too much of a standard sort of Kirito's the hero mentality, where things have to somehow come back to him having a save-the-day moment, whether or not he's really earned it in a story, because I know what you're talking about, and she really earned to have her own moment there.
Pretty much her whole development was leading towards, I own my own strength, I am my own person, I can take care of myself. And when she finally reaches that point, they're like, and now Kirito can save you!
Aren't you glad he showed up?
Oh god. It was so bad. I was so mad. I'm still so mad.
But you wouldn't get so mad if it wasn't such a great show in that first story arc.
It's true. I mean, they say that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. And I'm definitely not apathetic towards these characters and these storylines. The thing for me is, this show had such a strong first arc that none of the rest of the show compares to it. And you have that goodwill towards the characters, so you want to keep watching, but it doesn't pay off. So for me, I wish I could go back in time and stop watching after the first story arc. Because if I did that, I would think this is an amazing show and I would recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is still some value to even the second half of the first season, and the second season, there's stuff that's worth watching, but you're right that if they had just stopped at that certain point, then this would have been one of those short, tight, really quality shows like Madoka Magica or something that just starts and ends where it should, and everything about it just leaves you feeling great.
I guess we would miss out on some of my favorite Shinon scenes, though.
That we would.
Alright, you know what? I could stand watching it again. It'll be nice to see what that first arc is like now that I know where it's going.
It is really still good storytelling.
Yeah, that's true. Alright, put it on.
Alright, Sword Art Online.
Anime Indecision. Cha! Sorry, I saw my opening.